The days sped by as if racing to complete months and turn over the years. It no longer mattered which summer it was or whose story from the land of suffering this was. It made no difference whether the hope that had died was hers or if the wasted years belonged to her. Everything had become equal for Iman and held only one meaning: new burden. The sewing machine she had brought with her from her grandfather's home now kept her company in her loneliness. The neighbors had returned, asking her to tailor wedding dresses for their daughters, embroider pillows, and ruffle curtains for bridal rooms. Despite their invitations for her to unburden her sorrows and their wishes for Hassan's safe return, she found joy in pouring her taste and skill into crafting beautiful designs. But when winter came and the visits stopped, loneliness settled back, and despairing thoughts took over. She returned to her familiar spot on the steps, lost in thought, wondering what to do with herself. Her aunt's voice was filled only with stories of prisons, prisoners, visiting times, and Red Cross tickets. The household had shaped its entire rhythm around these timings. Afaf never missed a visit to Hassan, claiming it was out of concern for her aunt's health, while Iman chose not to attend any of them, and no one asked her any more. As usual, everyone awoke, went their separate ways, and Iman finished her chores, sitting in her regular spot on the steps, daydreaming. After all those wasted years, she imagined herself running freely in a land filled with flowers and butterflies, playing and laughing without fear or fatigue. She saw herself stumble, about to fall, but a smiling figure appeared, catching her hand, and she smiled back at him, saying, "I knew you'd find me." Iman closed her eyes, trying to hold on to this image, not letting it escape her grasp. So deep was her focus that she did not notice her uncle coming down the stairs and sitting beside her, looking at her with sympathy. He said, trying to catch her attention, "It's a beautiful sun today." Startled by his voice, Iman sat up and replied, "Am I in your way?" "Not at all," he replied gently. "In fact, today I want to talk to you. As for going to the bakery, it's not that urgent." "But you're the bakery owner." "Yes, but I know no more about running it than the young men working there. I bought it and left it to them. They sleep there, preparing the dough at night so it's ready by morning, and make the sesame cookies on time for them to rise and be baked at dawn. As for me, I'm just the investor, and they're the ones who carry the trust, as you know." Iman stayed silent, leaving him the space to broach whatever topic he wanted, so he continued, "But you, my daughter, you worry me. I see you always gloomy, as if the world had ended. Why don't you go to Al-Aqsa Mosque, the markets, or visit the neighbors? You should live your life as you should, or one day you'll find yourself an old woman alone like me." "Do you know, uncle, the thought of leaving the house doesn't bring me any comfort. It's the opposite, actually. I'm comfortable here, with the quiet I've grown used to. And as for the days Aunt is home, I'd rather just stay in bed." "My daughter, it's been more than 2 years since Hassan was imprisoned, and you haven't changed. If you want, I can talk to your aunt and request a divorce for you so you can start over with your life. He's been sentenced for life after all. She'll understand." Iman stayed silent, so he continued, "Or if you'd like, I could make arrangements to return you to your family. I've experience with these matters." "What do you mean?" she asked, curious. The uncle chuckled and said, "One day I'll tell you my story, but it'll stay between us." "Who are you talking about? I love hearing stories." "Well, it's a long story, one of a girl who went through things far worse than what you've endured many times over. But whenever I remember her, I feel she must be all right because she possesses the strength and resilience I knew her to have." The uncle looked into Iman's eyes and saw her attentively following every word, as though determined to hear this girl's story, so he said, "All right. I heard you singing a folk chant a few days ago that goes, 'O Zionist, make your escape, the rebels have prevailed, with Fawzi al-Kawukji, the hero of the free.' Where did you hear that chant?" "I heard my grandmother sing it." "Do you know who Fawzi al-Kawukji is?" "Yes, he was one of the resistance leaders before the 1948 war." "Exactly. The story begins in those days. A little girl was born to a resistance fighter under al-Kawukji's command, a man named Khalil. When the girl was just a month old, news came that her father had been martyred. The martyr left behind a young widow with a family of 4 daughters and 1 son, with no provider except for God. Of course, the other fighters tried to help as much as they could, but times were hard for everyone, and eventually they found work for the young mother to support her children. In those days there was something in Jerusalem called the Palestinian Wounded Association, and she found work there as a nurse, which meant she had to move from Ramla, where she lived, to Jerusalem to start her job. Not 3 years had passed before the country was ablaze with war. The British government issued death sentences against all fighters, forcing most of them to smuggle their families into Egypt. But this woman had tied her fate to the fighters' cause and couldn't flee with her entire family. So she came to the orphanage where I worked as a skilled cook, left her daughter Nawal and her son at the orphanage, and departed for Egypt with her 3 other daughters. The uncle swallowed with difficulty, lifting his gaze to the sky and said, "My God, it's a painful story. I don't know how to tell it. If I hadn't seen that little girl grow into a strong, wise woman, I wouldn't be able to bear the weight of her story. She was only 3 years old, yet she held on to her older brother, comforting him, patting his face and hair to calm him until he slept beside her, as the adults looked on in astonishment. The boy was attached to his sister until one day, the head of the orphanage, a hard-hearted woman without mercy, pulled him from her embrace and ordered that he be sent to the boys' side of the orphanage, forbidding him from returning to her, all in the name of keeping boys and girls separate. But the boy went mad with grief, and Nawal cried endlessly. Yet she always found a way to embrace her brother every day. I remember Nawal well. She was so beautiful as a child, with fair skin and delicate features, her expressions intelligent and lively. Every year, King Abdullah and his wife would choose a girl from the orphanage to adopt, raising her in the palace and educating her as royalty. One year they chose Nawal, but she clung to her brother, who held onto her neck and wouldn't let go. Instead of taking them both, they chose another girl. Nawal couldn't understand what was happening around her, but she cried constantly, always asking for her mother. No one at the orphanage hugged her or offered her any sense of security. Unlike the other orphans, Nawal had no relatives to visit her, no connection to anyone beyond the orphanage walls. No one ever came to ask about her, or to bring her gifts like the others received. During Ramadan and other holidays, the orphanage would empty out because relatives would come and take the children to spend time with them. But for Nawal and her brother, no one came. I would go to the orphanage just to prepare food for her, and when she didn't come to eat in the kitchen, I'd wait until the head of the orphanage left, then sneak her a little of her favorite food, hoping she'd eat. One day, the uncle fell silent, looking at Iman before saying, "You wouldn't believe what happened." "What was it?" "Their mother came. Finally." Yes, she came back from Egypt, but she only asked to take her son back, leaving Nawal in the orphanage. "What do you mean? Did she really take him and leave her behind?" Of course, the orphanage was obliged to hand him over to her, and couldn't force her to take Nawal. Nawal filled the orphanage with her cries, watching her mother walk away with her brother, who was also crying and trying to break free from his mother's grasp to reach his sister, but it was no use. The mother pulled her son away, and the cruel head of the orphanage dragged Nawal back inside. The rest of us stood by, swallowing our tears, helpless to do anything for that poor child. The director started beating Nawal, punishing her and cursing her with every insult imaginable, but she continued to cry out, filling the orphanage with her sorrow, while no one dared to intervene. One day years later, Nawal said to me, "I just wanted my mother to look back, to glance at me as I cried and called out to her. If I could have seen her face, or if she had promised to come back for me as she did for my brother. But I don't understand why she did this to me." So Nawal grew up in the orphanage. Yes, and the only comfort she had were the letters her brother sent from Egypt. In each one he would write the same words, "Be patient. I will come and take you from there." And did he ever come for her? The uncle sighed. When she was about 10 years old, the orphanage was emptying for another holiday. Nawal couldn't bear her loneliness while the other girls' faces were lit with joy as they left to be with their families. She cried, hitting the walls with her hands and stomping the ground with her feet until she fainted. That day, I was there as usual, preparing food for the staff on duty and for her. When I looked for her, she seemed to be on her last breath. I ran to alert the supervisors, and within an hour, Nawal was in the hospital. She spent the holiday there, with the nurses wondering why no one visited her. She answered bitterly, "I am alone. I am from the orphanage. To be honest, I thought for a moment about taking that girl. Since I'm a man without children, it crossed my mind to adopt her." "Why didn't you?" I tried. I submitted a request to the orphanage, but they rejected it, saying they would only release her to someone who could prove family ties or relation. And did Nawal know about it? When I told her I wanted to kidnap her from the orphanage after my request was denied, she cleverly replied, "You'll kidnap me only to be thrown in prison, and then I'll be sent back here. Why go through the trouble?" Iman laughed at his words, and he laughed with her before continuing, "Ah, my dear, I did everything I could to look after her and check on her every time she returned from school." School? Did Nawal go to school? Of course. Let me paint a full picture for you of her life there. The girls at the orphanage would wake up at 4 in the morning to the sound of the director banging her stick on the doors. The first thing they did each day was clean the boys' section, then clean their own. They'd scrub the floors, doors, windows, and walls with soap and water, then take the laundry downstairs to wash in huge washing machines, hanging everything to dry. Only after all that would they have breakfast and get ready for school. Every day they'd file out in neat rows, dressed in black stockings and black headscarves, heading to Al-Mamuniya school. Nawal studied there until the 6th grade. And why didn't she finish her education? Well, I was partly to blame. That year, during Eid al-Adha, I visited her while she was alone in the orphanage. I asked, "Don't you have any family? Isn't there anyone you could visit?" She simply replied, "No." When I asked her how she knew her family was in Egypt, she pulled out a few letters from her pocket saying, "These are from my brother Marwan, who was here with me. They come every month, and he still promises to take me from here." Her answer wasn't enough for me, so I kept pressing her with questions until she finally told me, "I have an uncle in Jordan." She gave me his full name and enough of his address that I traveled to Jordan, asking around until I finally found him. I began telling him about Nawal and her loneliness, hoping to ignite some familial loyalty within him. He was moved and promised to come for her. The uncle paused, and then with a slight smile he added, "Perhaps one day I'll introduce you to her. She occasionally visits my bakery." "So she's here in Jerusalem these days?" asked Aman. "No, she's in Ramallah. I might tell you the story of how she returned from Jordan on another occasion, but now it's getting late." Before he could finish, he slapped his forehead and said, "Oh, I forgot I have a meeting with your partner at the store for our share of the accounts for the past 6 months. I must go there quickly." He glanced at his watch and said, "But I doubt he's still waiting. He's a spoiled young man who despises old bakeries." Iman laughed, descending the steps with a smile, when a light knocking came at the door. The uncle said, "I'll get it. Are you expecting someone?" "No," she replied. Iman went to her room, standing by the door to see who it might be. She heard her uncle's cheerful voice as he opened the door and welcomed the visitor with laughter. "I was just telling my daughter that you probably can't stand waiting in the bakery," he said, chuckling. "Yes, Omar showed me the way to your house, but I'm in a bit of a hurry. I'd like to give you the money," replied the visitor. The uncle responded warmly, "My dear boy, you're in my house. Come in and have a cup of coffee." The uncle called out to Aman, "Prepare some coffee, Aman." Aman felt her heart skip a beat at the sound of the man's voice. It resembled that of someone she knew. She pushed the thought aside and went quickly to the kitchen to make the coffee, while overhearing her uncle ask, "So when did you come from London?" "A week ago." "How long are you staying?" "The usual. 5 months. I like summer here but winter there." Iman's heart raced as she heard him mention London in that familiar voice and wondered, could it be Rami? If only it were Rami, then let the world do as it pleases afterward. The uncle moved towards her, eager to take the coffee from her hands, and said, "Come, my daughter. I want to introduce you to our partner. He noticed your designs on the sewing machine and would like to talk to you about them." Iman wiped her hands and smoothed her dress, only to find herself face to face, after all these years, with Rami. Her cheeks flushed, and her body shook with a nervous tremor, overwhelming her senses so that she struggled to speak. Swallowing hard, she finally managed to say, "You're Rami." "Yes. And you are?" He then looked at her uncle and said, "She isn't your daughter. You're Iman, Iman from Al-Sharia." "Yes, that's me," she replied. The uncle, surprised by their recognition, asked, "You two know each other? Sit down and tell me what's going on here." Rami replied, "How are you? How have you been? You've changed. Still beautiful, of course, but different. And you're no longer the young man you once were. You're fuller. Both laughed to cover their embarrassment, and Rami turned to the uncle, recounting how he met Iman. Each time he spoke, he looked at Iman as if asking, "Do you remember? Is this true?" And she nodded, smiling as if wanting to assure him that every moment of that day was etched in her memory. The uncle, pleased for Iman's sake, said, "Then since you've taken care of her for us, we owe you a dinner in return. You should come and meet her aunt and sister." But Rami, rather than responding to the invitation, turned back to Iman and asked, "So, Hassan is your cousin?" "Yes." "And your husband?" The uncle intervened quickly. "Yes, she's your partner's wife. I'm sure you were informed that he married." "No," Rami replied. The uncle gently patted Rami on the shoulder and said, "Enjoy your coffee so we don't delay you, and tomorrow come back to spend the evening with us. We can talk about everything then, God willing." The uncle walked out with Rami, closing the door behind them. Iman sat in her seat, staring at the empty coffee cups, replaying what had happened over and over in her mind until she nearly lost her sanity from the shock. She didn't know how much time had passed while she kept wondering, was he Hassan's partner all these years without us knowing? And now today I finally see him. He found me at last. Or perhaps he never searched for me at all, and it's just fate tossing us towards our destinies. Her aunt peeked out from her room, trying to assess what was going on, and the uncle said, "Your partner from the shop happens to be the same young man who accompanied Iman through Al-Sharia and over the mountains to deliver her safely to Afaf here in Jerusalem. So, I invited him to dinner tomorrow. And since I'm a bachelor, you all will be in charge of cooking." "But Abu Walid, that's too much," replied her aunt. The uncle ignored her objection, leaned toward Iman and whispered, "I bought almonds and pine nuts, so remember to use them generously in the dishes. Deal?" The uncle's happiness for Iman was evident, as if he were reliving his painful memories of Nawal, but in a positive way this time. Now he could host Iman, feed her, and take care of her guests without needing official documents from the courts. Afaf approached Iman, helping her carry the groceries to the kitchen, and said, "So that's the story. Our partner is your old friend from the journey through Al-Sharia." "Yes, it's him." "Then welcome. But why are you so flustered?" Iman fell silent, and Afaf, respecting her silence, let it pass. They continued organizing everything in the kitchen, each lost in her thoughts. Afaf was wrapped in her longing for Hassan's words from behind bars, while Iman's mind raced with thoughts about what tomorrow might bring. Neither of the two girls could sleep that night. They were restless, each noticing the other's movements in her room, sometimes in the courtyard. Finally, Afaf decided to join Iman, slipping into her bed beside her. She said softly, "This is Hassan's bed. He loved no one else sleeping in it before him." Iman almost replied with harsh words to Afaf, but she chose to turn away in silent protest. Afaf continued, "Before him and before you both. Or rather, before him and you," Iman replied sharply, looking intently into Afaf's eyes, which made Afaf uneasy. "Why do you say that? Listen to me, Afaf. Tonight I feel reckless. I could blurt out everything I have held in all at once, so why don't we end this?" Afaf felt a little afraid as she sensed a change in Iman's usual quiet demeanor, so she remained silent as Iman continued, "I know that you and Hassan love each other and that he made a vow to be with you. And truthfully, that has brought me some relief because I don't love him, nor do I want him as my husband. Still, neither of you ever asked me for my opinion, or bothered to think of me as you made promises to each other, as if I didn't matter." Iman looked at Afaf intently and continued, "Would I have said no if they had asked me? Would I not have told them I didn't want him? Wouldn't Hassan have been free to marry you? And wouldn't I be free as well?" Afaf started to stammer. But what, Afaf? No one ever told me anything, even though I was living here among you all these years. We ate, we slept, and we lived together, that's all it was. And honestly, if I hadn't promised my mother never to return, I would have left long ago. But I despise the idea." Silence weighed heavily in the room, leaving both girls at a loss for words. Suddenly, Afaf burst into tears, exclaiming, "Aunt knows about our relationship. She knows about his pledge and vow to me, and that he's wanted to marry me since we were in high school studying together. And yet, I don't understand why she rejected the idea so strongly, or how your engagement to Hassan was arranged without even his knowledge. I suspect Aunt must have brought some man pretending to be Hassan, and your mother some girl pretending to be you, and they forged the marriage papers with your names. Otherwise, how could it have happened? I don't know. But it doesn't matter anymore. According to this Israeli identity card, I'm married to Hassan, and for the government I'm his wife. Though God knows that will never be true. So what now, Iman? What's the solution? A solution to what? What if you wanted to marry someone else? Should I ask Hassan for a divorce on your behalf? I don't know why he hasn't divorced me already if it's that simple. I don't know either. The two girls shared a moment of sarcastic silence, each looking at the other. Then they both laughed at the absurdity of the situation. Afaf hugged Iman and then, as she was getting off the bed, said, I'll turn tomorrow's dinner into a story, as it seems our guest will be a unique addition to this family. What do you mean? Do you think I'm in love with him? No. Maybe he has a family of his own now. I think he's in his late 20s by now, so he's probably married. And did I suggest anything of the sort? Rest now, and let's leave things to fate. Yes, good night. Despite both pretending to go to sleep, sleep eluded them, leaving their eyes wide open, refusing to grant them rest that night. The next morning arrived with a cheerful face, as if the house was filled with the festive echoes of Eid Takbir chants. Swings had been set up and sweets were prepared. Iman rose from her bed and for the first time went to her wardrobe, rummaging through the dresses long left untouched since her wedding. She chose the most beautiful dress to wear. And for the first time, she found herself searching for remnants of makeup. Then she hurried to the mirror, looking at her face, lifting her hair up and letting it fall over her shoulders. Neglected for years, her hair now reached her lower back, and she couldn't suppress the constant smile lighting up her face that day. Afaf watched her as she prepared food and tidied up the house, noticing her going back and forth in the yard without seeking her help or letting Aunt notice as much as possible. When she couldn't hold back any longer, she approached Aunt to convince her to go to Al-Aqsa Mosque to pray, leaving the house in her and Iman's care to get everything ready. As soon as Aunt left, Afaf grabbed Iman and lightly slapped her, saying sternly, Stop! You're driving me crazy with these antics. Iman stopped in shock at the unexpected slap. The silly smile wiped off her face as she asked seriously, Why did you slap me? I'm sorry, but you need to get a grip, or you'll be a laughingstock tonight. Pull yourself together. He's just a friend who might not even remember you. Iman sank into her chair silently and Afaf, taking advantage of her stillness, said, No makeup, no fancy hairstyles. It's enough to wear a nice dress and tie your hair back in a ponytail. Your face looks beautiful like that. Don't pay him any attention. He'll probably just eat and leave. Afaf's words, as harsh as they were, brought Iman back to reality, helping her see things more practically. Yes, she's right, Iman told herself, then went to tie her hair back and returned to organizing the house and preparing it to welcome the guest. Evening fell, and Uncle Abu Walid came home earlier than usual. Before changing his clothes, he peeked into the kitchen where the two girls were working and said, Don't forget that I'm a professional cook at heart, so I want to see what you've prepared. Then he said to Iman, As I expected, go to the door. You'll find Omar waiting there. Let him in quickly. Uncle Abu Walid gathered the chicken onto a large tray, sprinkled it with spices, and carefully placed some vegetables around it. He handed the tray to Omar and instructed, Straight to the oven. You know what to do. Where are the almonds and pine nuts? Add them in, he added. Uncle continued putting his finishing touches on the rice and meats while the two girls watched, happy to have him there. Meanwhile, Aunt sat quietly in the courtyard, silently displeased with what she was seeing. Everything was ready. Even Uncle himself had dressed up, smelling of cologne, his headdress and prayer beads neatly in place. He sat down, awaiting Rami's arrival. When the doorbell rang, he said to Iman, Go open the door and let him in. Iman went to the door, her eyes meeting Afaf's for reassurance. Afaf nodded, encouraging her, so she opened the door. There stood Rami, holding a beautiful bouquet of fresh flowers. He extended them toward her, saying, I bought these for you. Here, take them. Iman shyly thanked him and took the flowers, inviting him inside before rushing to the kitchen to find a suitable vase. Afaf, seeing her hurry away, whispered, "They're beautiful flowers and they must have been expensive. Aunt will kill him." "What?" The two girls burst out laughing, prompting Uncle to call out, "Girls, the food! We're hungry." "All right," said Afaf. "I'll start setting it up." "Okay, I'll help after I arrange these flowers," replied Aman, placing them in a vase. Afaf began bringing out some plates and cups to the table. When Aman came out holding the chicken tray, Rami immediately stood up and approached to help her, glancing at Uncle for permission. "May I help?" "Do as you wish." Rami followed Aman to the kitchen, carrying whatever was ready and bringing it to the table. Once everything was arranged, he said, "Please, Uncle and Aunt, come. The food looks delicious." Uncle laughed and remarked to Aunt, "See? The roles have reversed. This means Rami has become part of our family, just like Hassan." Aunt, however, rose with a stern look, stating, "No one is like Hassan." Uncle realized then that winning over Aunt would be no easy task. He took a deep breath, bracing himself for the challenge and saying to himself, "Well then, I'll fight this battle for Iman." The conversation around the dinner table was lively, and the delicious flavors tempted everyone to linger, savoring both the food and the moment. At one point, Rami said, "I wanted to ask Aman about those dresses I saw by the sewing machine during my last visit." Aunt immediately interrupted, "What about the dresses? They're beautiful, and I'm thinking about using some of the designs in my own tailor shop." Aman replied with surprise, "We have a tailor shop? Didn't you know? Aren't we partners?" Aunt quickly intervened, "There's no need for that. Ready-made clothes have taken over the market. No one goes to tailors anymore." "Yes, but I want to introduce these designs into the ready-made collection in various sizes. This could draw more people back to tailoring." Uncle, hoping to steer the conversation away from Aunt's resistance, said, "That's a good idea. Iman would enjoy getting out of the house once in a while to work on her designs in your shop, right, Iman?" Iman looked at Aunt before answering, uncertain. Uncle, sensing her hesitation, offered, "I'll take her myself when she's ready. Now tell me, Rami, are you married?" Rami chuckled, took a sip and replied, "And what wife would let me disappear for months at a time, here and there?" "Good," Uncle replied. "Marriage only brings problems anyway." Aunt, her tone icy, intervened, "Then find yourself a bride. Perhaps you'll have your wedding with Hassan and Iman." She then added, as she dabbed her mouth with a napkin, "You do know she's my son's wife, don't you?" Rami, sensing the weight of her words, thanked everyone for the delicious meal, expressing his gratitude. "It's been a long time since I've had food this good." Uncle stood up, showing Rami to the wash basin while jokingly commenting, "So you're the strong man who carried that girl across the mountains." Rami chose not to respond, ending the topic. But Afaf, noticing his approach, took the opportunity to say, "You know, in a few months, Hassan will have been in prison for 4 years. According to the law, that means Iman could divorce him if she chooses." "Who knows," said Rami. "Maybe Hassan will be released sooner than that. Israel often engages in prisoner exchanges." Uncle, skeptical, asked, "How so? We haven't heard of any such deals recently." Rami then sat down with Uncle, and the discussion turned political. Rami recounted dates and events that confirmed his words, saying, "Where were you last year and the year before? Didn't you know what happened back then?" "What happened last year?" "Well, in 73, Syria exchanged 4 Israeli pilots for 5 Syrian pilots and a member of parliament. Later that year, Syria received 96 Syrian prisoners in exchange for 3 Israeli pilots, and Egypt exchanged over 240 Israeli prisoners for about 8,300 Egyptians." Uncle, visibly intrigued, asked, "How do you know all these numbers?" Rami replied, "How do you not? I read about it in the British newspapers." Uncle, looking to Aunt, remarked with a smile, "Listen to this, Aunt. He says there are prisoner exchanges happening. Did you hear him say Palestinian prisoners? Each country gets its own prisoners back." "Not necessarily, Aunt. This year, Syria received around 400 prisoners, including Iraqis and Moroccans. The papers are still discussing pending deals that are under negotiation." Aunt murmured quietly, "May God make your words come true and let Hassan return to us free and safe." Afaf, seizing the chance, added softly, "And may he come back to me." Rami, thinking Afaf was Hassan's sister, paid no attention to her words, continuing his conversation with Uncle, sipping tea and coffee until he finally stood up to leave. As he shook hands with Iman, Aunt's disapproval didn't prevent him from saying, "I'll expect you at the tailor shop tomorrow or the day after. Please, I hope you come." Rami left and Uncle rubbed his head in thought, almost knocking his headscarf off. Smiling, he muttered, "My head is spinning from his talk, his knowledge and his taste. I should marry one of you off to him. He's practically killing me with admiration." The girls fell silent, swallowing their laughter as they glanced at Aunt's stern expression. After the evening's lively dinner, Iman was completely absorbed in tidying up with Afaf, and by the time she collapsed onto her bed, sleep claimed her almost instantly. The next morning was anything but ordinary. The sun seemed to shine with a renewed brightness, as if it had chosen that day to wear a new outfit in celebration of Iman's happiness. The breeze was filled with the fragrance of blooming flowers, creating a beautiful and harmonious atmosphere. Even Afaf's mischievous glances and Aunt's disapproving looks couldn't shake Iman's cheerful mood, as her mind overflowed with a myriad of thoughts and countless possibilities for meeting Rami. Iman walked around the house, trying to hide her joy from Uncle Abu Walid, who merely laughed and said, "Remember the way because you'll be coming back alone." "Yes," she replied. "And if you feel uncomfortable at any point, leave immediately," he added. "All right." As they arrived, Uncle Abu Walid said, "Here we are. These are the commercial shops." Iman looked at the shop's wide entrance, noticing the display of elegant bridal gowns in the glass windows, showcasing the latest trends. As she looked up, she saw a small staircase in one corner of the shop leading to an upper floor. Just then, Rami came rushing down to greet them. "Welcome, welcome. Please come in, Uncle," he said, shouting. "Ibtisam, bring some coffee for Uncle Abu Walid." Uncle tried to politely decline, saying he needed to get back to his bakery, but Rami insisted on hosting him for a few minutes. And of course, Uncle didn't forget to remind Rami to take good care of Iman before leaving. Rami's response was reassuring. "Don't worry. It's not my first time looking after her." Then, as Rami took Iman by the hand, he led her upstairs quickly, saying, "Let me show you the tailoring area. Come along." They climbed the stairs, and Rami began introducing her to the people working there. "This is Shadia. She oversees the girls and manages the final ironing of the clothes." Iman glanced at Shadia, who stood behind a large table covered with freshly sewn dresses, pressing an iron over them. Iman sensed a bit of coldness in Shadia's demeanor as she greeted her without looking up from her work. "Hello," Shadia said. Rami continued introducing Iman to the other girls, explaining, "They're all skilled seamstresses. Just give them a design, and you'll be amazed at what they can do." At that moment, Shadia commented, "We already have plenty of new designs waiting to be made." Iman quickly understood that Shadia wasn't exactly thrilled with her presence. But with Rami holding her hand and guiding her around the shop, she pushed those thoughts aside. After showing Iman around the tailor shop, Rami continued holding her hand, guiding her toward the door. He called out to Ibtisam, "Take care of the shop while I'm gone. And if the fabric supplier shows up, pay him as I instructed." They stepped outside and Iman, slightly confused, asked, "Where are we going?" "I'll take you to the fabric supplier so you can choose some materials, then we'll stop by the notions dealer." "You know who the notions dealer is, right?" "Yes, the one who sells threads, buttons, needles, and beads." "Exactly. I like a girl who knows her stuff," Rami said. Smiling, Iman's heart danced to the sound of his words, feeling like each phrase was the most beautiful music she'd ever heard. She played his sentences in her head, repeating them over and over, basking in the glow of his gaze every time he looked at her. This is life," Iman thought as she sat beside Rami in his car, watching his hands on the steering wheel. She suddenly asked, "Where are you taking me?" "I'm taking you to the fabric supplier." "Didn't you agree to come along? And are we going by car? Did you think he was nearby? Anyway, he's in Jerusalem. We're not leaving the city." Questions flooded Iman's mind, each one chasing after the last. She wondered, does he care about me after all these years? Or is it pity for my situation? A sigh escaped her lips as thoughts of Hassan crossed her mind. Rami noticed her expression darken, and with a concerned tone he said, "I don't want to see you sad. If something upsets you, just tell me, and I'll remove it from your life. Iman's lips softened into a smile, sensing an opening to some long-awaited answers. She asked, "And why would you do all this? The world is full of sadness. Let it fill the world but not your world. You've had enough. And what would you do about it?" "Well, I'll ask Uncle to let you come to the shop every Saturday, and I'll set aside time just for you. I'll take you all around Jerusalem and Ramallah and make sure you have the best of times. So what do you say?" Iman was silent, knowing that his offer, though tempting, was a huge risk to her reputation and her morals. Yet a voice inside her screamed, "Why not? Why not?" Rami, sensing her hesitation, said, "Weren't we together throughout that entire Sharia course? Didn't I prove I could be trusted? Why are you afraid of me now?" "I'm not afraid of you," she replied. "Then what's holding you back? I'll come every Saturday." The Saturdays became like holidays for Iman, as though they compensated her with months of happiness for all the years of sorrow. Her laughter filled Rami's world with joy and contentment, prompting him to tell her one day, "I searched for you for many years, leaving my family in London every year to come to Jerusalem, hoping to find you." "Why?" Iman asked. Rami didn't like her question and replied, "I really needed that coat." They both laughed, and then he added, "Don't you know why I searched for you? Something always told me that something happened to you, that you were searching for me. I would see you in my dreams, calling out for me, and yet I couldn't do anything to save you from the distress you were enduring." Rami paused, then looked into Iman's eyes and said, "I want to ask your aunt for your hand. What do you say?" Iman remained silent, overwhelmed by a wave of joy greater than her heart could contain. Rami continued, "I insist on hearing your answer, and I won't take you home until I get it." Blushing, she replied, "All right, if you do, I'll agree. Then I'll come this week. My leave here is ending soon, so I'll ask for your hand and take some photos of you to show my family. Next summer, I'll bring them here for our wedding. I'll take you with me to see the whole world and make you the happiest woman alive." When Iman returned home, Rami's words danced in her mind, making her giddy to the point that she could barely recognize the roads or doors of the houses. When she spotted Uncle Abu Walid's bakery, she descended the steps to it, asking, "Where's Uncle Abu Walid?" "He's praying at Al-Aqsa Mosque. But the prayer finished a while ago." "Yes, he likes to stay there until Maghrib prayer. So if I go, will I find him there?" Omar, looking disapproving, replied, "Are you going to the mosque in those clothes? Go back home and do as you wish." Iman climbed the steps in a state of confusion. If she returned home for her prayer clothes, her aunt wouldn't let her leave again. But if she approached the mosque gate in her current attire, the mosque guards would stop her. As she pondered, she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder and turned to find Uncle Abu Walid smiling. "I'll take you home. I wanted to talk to you anyway." "Thank God. I was looking for you." "All right, before you say anything, I want to ask you, is it true that you leave with Rami every Saturday in his car and don't return until this late?" "Yes, I meant to tell you about it." "Tell me about what? Don't you know that what you're doing is forbidden, my child? We are people who fear God. I don't know if my days in this world are numbered or if I have only hours left, but I don't want to face God knowing I neglected your protection." "But uncle, I'm not doing anything to anger God. I've simply found someone who cares about my well-being, who makes me happy, who has never acted disrespectfully or done anything that would." "And why all of this?" "Well, he wants to propose to me. That's why I was looking for you." Uncle Abu Walid suddenly stopped, looking at Iman with sadness, and said, "Have you forgotten that you're married?" A deep sadness overtook Iman. She turned to leave, wanting to avoid going home, but Uncle held her arm, saying, "Where are you going?" "I don't know. I had completely forgotten about that matter. And I hate going home to hear my aunt say things I don't want to hear. Go back home. Don't be more foolish than you already are. Go home and wait for me tonight. May God help us." Iman returned home, avoiding her aunt's furious gaze. She went to her room, unsure of what to say or do. Shortly after, Afaf came in holding a small radio, humming along to a song by Kulthum, and said, "Did you hear? They've allowed prisoners to listen to Kulthum's songs daily. The Israeli radio plays her songs at exactly 4 o'clock every day." Iman looked over at Afaf as she hung up her clothes in the wardrobe but didn't respond. Afaf continued, Hassan must be listening to this song with me right now. When Iman didn't reply, Afaf's tone turned angry. Why don't you care about what I'm saying? Why should I care? You're talking about Hassan. Don't mock me. I'm not mocking you. Hassan, his love for you, his bond to me, his songs, his letters to you, his curses to me, his imprisonment so you can be free while I remain his prisoner. Yes, that's Hassan. And I'm just one of his possessions. Afaf, visibly upset, left the room with the radio, slamming the door behind her. Iman, unaffected by her anger, called out, Close the door behind you. Aunt had been silently observing everything, careful not to drive her niece away from the family, for if that happened, she would have handled things differently. Silence enveloped the house in a calm cloak. People began leaving the mosque after the evening prayer to return home. When the doorbell rang, Iman thought to herself, It must be Uncle. I wonder what he'll say to Aunt. Afaf's voice echoed from across the house. Check the door. Uncle wouldn't ring the bell. Aunt slowly walked to the door and opened it, finding a beautiful bouquet of flowers with Rami standing behind them, asking for permission to enter. Iman's heart leapt into her throat in fear, for Rami had arrived before Uncle, and that was not a good sign. Aunt set the flowers aside, reluctantly welcoming Rami, who sat down, saying, The truth is I couldn't wait. I had to resolve this matter tonight. Good news, I hope? What is this matter? In her room, Iman collapsed onto her bed, terrified, while Afaf rushed to her asking, What's going on? And why the flowers? Meanwhile, Aunt's voice filled the house as she yelled, Are you insane? You're asking me for the hand of a married woman? You're asking me for the hand of my son's wife, your business partner's wife. Rami stood up as Aunt, now furious, turned her back on him, shouting, I never expected this from you. If Hassan knew, he would die in prison. But that's not what I meant. Please hear me out. No, you listen to me, young man. I want you to leave this house and never come back. Rami didn't wait for her to finish. He walked to the door, but Aunt called out, handing him the flowers, Don't forget these and forget everything else. Rami left, holding the bouquet as though he were carrying it to a funeral. He walked away, his steps heavy, his heart broken. This was the first time he had faced such rejection and difficulty. Meanwhile, Iman sat on her bed, slapping her face and crying, as Afaf tried to calm her, protesting, I'm not Hassan's wife, I don't want him. Aunt had no right to treat Rami this way. Uncle Abu Walid entered the house, alarmed by the loud crying and wailing, and asked in surprise, What's going on? Iman stepped into the courtyard, her voice thundering across the house. She threw Rami out of the house. She threw him out because he came to steal her son's wife. I will never be her son's wife as long as I live, and I won't stay in this house any longer. Uncle held Iman's arm as she headed for the door, determined to leave, and said, Sit down for a moment. This house is not your aunt's house. It's your house. I have no home, and I don't want one from anyone. I'll go sleep at Al-Aqsa Mosque and beg for food from its visitors until God decides my fate. Listen to me, I'm not joking. I registered this house in your name, and I have the papers with me. Would you like to see them? Iman calmed down as she saw the seriousness in her uncle's eyes. He repeated, This house is yours, my dear. So does that mean Rami was thrown out of my house? Oh, you poor girl. Rami is engaged to a German girl in London. Iman covered her mouth, trying to hold back words of disbelief. Sensing her shock, Uncle added, Do you remember my question earlier about what you do on Saturdays? You didn't even ask me how I knew. I visited the tailor shops and waited for you, and as I was chatting with Ibtisam, he mentioned, half joking, half seriously, that Rami is engaged to a German woman in London, and he's planning to marry her when he returns there. She even calls him every night after you leave. If that's true, then why did he come to propose to me? That's exactly what I intended to ask him if I'd seen him. Anyway, my dear, I'll go talk to him myself tomorrow, and I'll get to the bottom of this. Does that satisfy you? Iman wiped her tears with her hands, feeling like a child being comforted by her mother. She asked quietly, Why did you put the house in my name? Because I'm afraid that if I pass away, the house will be an easy target for the settlers. Haven't you heard what happened to Hussein? No, who's Hussein? Uncle took Iman's hand, guiding her to sit beside him, and began. She's an elderly woman who lives in a house larger than mine. Her children live in Jordan. One summer years ago, she went to visit her children, and when she returned, she found a Jewish family living in her house, using her furniture, her kitchen, her bedrooms. She went mad and they coldly threw her out. She protested, shouted, filed lawsuits, and was determined to die for her house. And what was the outcome? What? She now lives under the stairs of her own house, the stairs just like these, he said, pointing to the stairs in his house. She used to keep her stock of olives, oil and molasses under those stairs. Now that's where she sleeps and where she's allowed to live. What you're saying? How could this happen? The Jews claim their country is one of justice and democracy. Yes, they tell her to go to court. This is their justice and democracy. They'll drag the case out until that poor woman dies, and the house will remain in the hands of those hateful settlers. Would you want that to happen to me? No, but what's to stop the Jews from taking the house from me? Or maybe they'll leave me to live under the stairs like Hussein. True, which is why I advise you never to leave the house unless it's rented or sold to Arabs. Iman fell silent, exhausted from the crying and shouting. She then said, "Who knows, maybe one day you'll find I've left and never returned." Uncle Abu Walid forced a faint smile and said, "Go to bed and rest. Tomorrow I have something to discuss with you, with Rami, and with your aunt, who's been listening to us but staying silent about everything. Now I'll go check on the bakery. Peace be upon you." "And peace be upon you, uncle." Iman went to her room, her mind on the verge of bursting from the day's events. She clutched her head with both hands and threw herself onto the bed, lost in thought. Iman remained secluded in her room the entire next day. Afaf left quietly for work, while Aunt was only heard moving around during prayer times. Just before the afternoon prayer, Uncle Abu Walid entered the house, clearing his throat and loudly reciting the opening of a surah as he walked in, as was his habit, to announce his presence to the women. Iman immediately stood in front of him and asked, "What happened?" Uncle sat down without saying a word, and Iman pressed him. "Did you speak to him? What did he say? What happened?" Uncle remained silent, so she asked, "Did he say anything to hurt me?" Finally, Uncle replied, "I found out he left. He returned to Britain on the first available flight." "That's impossible." "It's true, he's gone." Iman sank to the floor in shock, her mind racing with imagined conversations between Rami and her uncle. She was trying to grasp his potential anger, his disappointment, but she never imagined Rami would close all doors between them by simply leaving. She lamented. "He was the last open door, and today he's the last door to be shut. He slammed it in my face and I thought he was different. I thought he could wait a few more hours to at least say goodbye to me." This time Iman did not cry. Instead, images of her mother flashed through her mind saying, "Yes, I want you to go to the West Bank. It's for your own good." Then she saw Hassan being carried on shoulders due to his injuries, and the image of the house door sealed with red wax. Finally, she envisioned Rami leaving through the door, closing it firmly behind him. That was the last image of him that Iman saw, the door shutting. Uncle Abu Walid gently said, "The door of God never closes in anyone's face." Iman looked at her uncle, her eyes filled with despair, and said, "Yes, Jerusalem is the gate to the day of judgment, the last open door until the day of resurrection, and the last closed door. Jerusalem and Rami have both conspired to kill me." Uncle said nothing in response to Iman's words. Instead, he called out to Aunt, "Call a doctor for her if she remains like this." Aunt quickly came over to lift Iman from the floor, but Iman gave her a long, deliberate look, refusing to let her touch her. She covered her mouth with her hand as if promising her aunt to remain silent, then stood up on her own and returned to her room, where she stayed. Iman returned to her usual silence and isolation, indifferent to what was happening around her, no longer paying attention to events. Saturdays were no longer like holidays. Instead, they became smoldering embers in the form of sweet memories she had stolen from life. Days passed quickly without her noticing until winter arrived. Uncle Abu Walid started spending more time at home, trying to engage Iman in various conversations, hoping to spark her curiosity, but to no avail. When summer finally arrived, bringing its dry, hot days, Iman began to wonder if Rami would return. Would he come back? Each day, Uncle reassured her that he had inquired, And Rami had not returned nor planned to come that summer. Gradually, her sweet dreams of seeing Rami again began to wither in her heart, until the last of those hopes dried up as summer followed summer. When Iman lost all expectation of his return and resigned herself to the thought that he'd forgotten her, she approached her uncle for advice. Do you think I should visit the tailor shop to check on things? If that's what you want, do as you wish. Aunt looked at Afaf and uncle looked at both of them, as if silently instructing one another to let Iman take her first step back into life. But Aunt, with an air of insistence, said, I think there's something I need to clarify for you, my dear. May I speak without you running off to isolate yourself in bed? Uncle objected. Not now. What's gotten into you, Aunt? But Iman said, Let her speak, Uncle. It's all the same to me now. What is it, Aunt? Aunt replied, I was never happy with what's happened to you, but after your uncle told you why he registered the house in your name, I hoped you'd understand why I insisted on keeping you as my son's wife. Iman looked at her aunt with a cold gaze, as if to say she didn't understand. What if something were to happen to me? What if I died and you were divorced from Hassan? Who would claim this house? Iman turned away as if protesting, but Aunt continued softly, It would be Hassan then. If you want a divorce, you can easily obtain one from the court. But if I die, you'll have no shelter or family, and that's what I fear for you. Iman quietly rose from her seat and went to sit on the steps as she often did since she arrived in this house. She began humming, recalling her grandmother singing at the top of her voice. O Mayjana, O Mayjana, O Mayjana, the flower of love, the spring of our land. Your blossoms in every color bloom, and sway on your branch like grace and gloom. Yet every love fades over time, but my love for you, O Jerusalem, will forever shine. Uncle Abu Walid came down and sat beside her on the steps, saying, What your aunt said makes some sense, doesn't it? Iman remained silent, looking at him with a gaze full of unspoken reproach. She held back a tear, refusing to let him see, and turned her face away. Uncle, realizing she had no response, filled the silence by saying, Do you remember our first conversation years ago? Iman didn't answer, so he continued, When I told you about Nawal? She returned from Egypt a few days ago and told me what happened to her there. Iman was intrigued by his last statement, afraid he might leave if she stayed silent. She asked, So she went to see her brother? Not exactly. Well, she told me that she arrived in Jordan with her uncle when she was about 11 years old. Would you like to hear the rest of her story? Afaf came over and sat nearby, saying, Is it Nawal's story? I've always wanted to know what happened to her. All right, then listen. Do you know the story of Cinderella? Yes. Nawal lived in her uncle's house just like Cinderella lived with her stepmother. She cleaned, washed, and cooked while her aunt enjoyed visiting friends and family. So, she didn't complete her education. No, her uncle wouldn't let her go to school. Her brother continued writing to her, promising he'd come to take her away from her uncle. But one day, her uncle arranged for her to be married at only 13, to a man much older than her, a truck driver who lived in a rented house in Ramallah. Iman and Afaf listened closely as Uncle continued Nawal's story, captivated by the trials she endured. Uncle continued, This man unfortunately was coarse and harsh. He treated the marriage as just an addition to his life without changing any of his bad habits. He even continued his relationships with other women, bringing them into the home he shared with Nawal. She learned to remain silent, fearing his anger, and endured his insults and abuses, living like a servant for 6 years, during which she bore him 2 daughters and a son. One day, his truck overturned in the Jordan Valley, and he was taken to the hospital with little hope for survival. But fate spared him, leaving him paralyzed, with severe damage to his spinal cord. He remained bedridden until he passed away less than a year ago. And Nawal? How did she manage to live? At first, she and her children survived on the charity and kindness of good people, until someone offered her a job as a cleaner at a teacher's hostel run by UNRW. She immediately took it, as it allowed her to provide food and money for her family. But when the war came, you'd never believe what she endured. What happened? When people fled and Ramallah was nearly deserted, Nawal stayed with her young children beside her bedridden husband. She couldn't escape with her children, nor could she carry him. When I asked her how she managed, she said, God is the provider. Neighboring hens would come each morning and lay eggs right by my house, and I'd feed my children with those eggs. The teachers also left me plenty of food supplies from the hostel as they prepared to close it down. That was enough for the first few weeks, and after that, life slowly returned to normal. Uncle explained how Nawal took various odd jobs to survive, adapting as her responsibilities grew, even going to work in a factory in Israel. At one point, her life was nearly cut short by a factory supervisor who locked her in a room with drying ovens, nearly suffocating her. Luckily, a worker discovered her just in time. She quit that job immediately. Despite all the hardship, Uncle added, Nawal remained devoted to her family. She never allowed anything to undermine her loyalty and commitment to them. After her husband's death, she called her brother, informing him that she wanted to visit Egypt with her children. She had one question she needed to ask her mother. Iman and Afaf listened intently, captivated by the turn in Nawal's story. So she traveled to Egypt to ask her mother one question, the question that had haunted her since childhood. Why did you do this to me? Upon her arrival, Nawal was left on the street outside her family's address, where a group of young men waited. She hesitated, unsure if they were family or strangers. Eventually, one approached her asking, Are you Aunt Nawal? I'm your sister's son. The whole family is waiting for you at home. Her arrival brought no hugs or kisses, just brief, dry handshakes and stares of curiosity. She couldn't resist asking her brother, Where's our mother? They all looked at each other silently until her brother finally said, She's at her place. I'll take you to see her tomorrow. The next day, he took her to a mental institution. Iman and Afaf gasped in disbelief as Uncle continued. Yes, she found her mother in an asylum. Ironically, when her mother had the choice, she had taken the son and abandoned the daughter to an orphanage. The son, however, had never forgiven her, constantly reminding her of her abandonment. Eventually, in a moment of anger, he struck her, leading to her mental decline. When Nawal saw her mother, Uncle continued, she whispered, Do you know me? No. I'm your daughter, Nawal. Do you remember me? Her mother replied, No, my Nawal was beautiful. But I'm Nawal, the daughter you left in an orphanage and took my brother with you. Why did you do that? Her mother fell silent, realizing that this truly was Nawal, her daughter, standing before her, confronting her after all these years. Nawal repeated the question over and over, but her mother remained silent until finally she uttered, Forgive me. But Nawal felt nothing for her. She didn't feel an ounce of sympathy or affection. Nevertheless, she made arrangements with the nurses, giving them some money and said, Please take care of my mother. After that, she left with her brother, but as she reached the gates of the hospital, she felt an emptiness, as though the encounter had left her unfulfilled. She hadn't heard what she needed to hear from her mother. She suddenly turned back to the hospital shouting, No, I won't forgive you. Her brother understood her pain and tried to make her stay in Egypt as joyful as possible, taking her and her children to beautiful places and even the zoo. But shortly after her return to Ramallah, she received a call from her brother with condolences. Her mother had passed away. He asked if she wanted to come back for the funeral, but she refused. Iman and Afaf remained silent, deeply moved by Nawal's story until Afaf finally sighed. I want to meet my real mother. After hearing this story, I'll work to find her in Jordan. Uncle noticed the sadness on Iman's face, and seeing her pain, he said, So you're planning to visit the tailor shop tomorrow? Startled, Iman looked at him and replied, I'm thinking about it. All right then. I'll accompany you there tomorrow. With that, Uncle got up, saying, Now go get some rest and let me get some rest in my room. Iman watched him go, deep in thought. She climbed the steps to her room, questioning herself, Should I go to the tailor shop or not? The next day, Iman closed the door behind her, taking her first step outside the house in several years. Her sadness, which had wrapped around her like mourning clothes, started to lift under the warm rays of the sun. Uncle Abu Walid walked beside her and said, What if we find Rami there? Iman looked at him in surprise and replied, Rami? He left years ago, and I doubt he'd return just because I stepped outside. Uncle looked at her silently, then stopped and said, What if we do see him? She hesitated, then replied, Rami doesn't mean anything to me anymore. Are you sure? Is there something you know but aren't telling me? No, I just worry that if you see him, it might stir old feelings, and you'll start spending time with him again. Don't worry, Uncle. I've regretted it deeply. I saw how he valued those joyful moments we spent together, and how much he sacrificed to preserve them. Good, my daughter, that's what I wanted to hear. We are people who fear God. Uncle left Iman at the entrance of the tailor shop and went on his way. Ibtisam stood up, welcoming her warmly. She chatted with him, reassured about the state of the business, and he mentioned that Rami still called from time to check on things. Iman climbed to the second floor, where she found Shadia and the other workers. To her surprise, Shadia still gave her that same cold look, but this time she didn't just limit herself to stares. She turned to a colleague and within earshot of Iman said, "Did Mr. Rami call yesterday? I needed to speak with him." "Yes, he asked about you." Iman, trying to establish some friendliness, said, "Is there something I can help you with?" "His name is Mr. Rami." "All right. Is there something I can help with?" "No, I don't leave things unfinished. In the past few years I've kept this shop running well, even as ready-made clothing took over the markets." "What did you do?" "I started a line of ready-made bed covers, tablecloths, and sofa throws. Look around. This shop is still in business, and I'll keep designing new items so Mr. Rami never has to rely on anyone else." "Good job. I want him to have peace of mind while he spends time with his fiancée in Germany." "That's good. Rami is a friend and deserves the best." "He's not just your friend, he's everyone's friend, Mr. Rami." "Yes, that's true." Iman kept quiet, suppressing her frustration. It felt as if Shadia's words were intentionally designed to remind her of her place. She turned to leave, but as she descended the steps, Shadia's colleague commented, "And they say love can kill." Shadia laughed, feigning innocence, and said, "It seems Iman is in love. Isn't that right?" Iman coldly looked back and replied, "Yes. How did you know?" The other girl added sarcastically, "Iman has a big heart, capable of loving more than one man." Choosing to ignore them, Iman exited the shop without responding. Ibtisam offered to drive her home and send her off with samples of the shop's latest designs, but Iman thanked him and walked alone, unsure of where her steps would lead. Soon she found herself sitting on a bench along the main road in Jerusalem, watching people pass by. Her thoughts circled back to Shadia's words. Was it worth the risk? Had she truly been deceived by his glances and words, so much so that she couldn't see reality? Now he's off somewhere enjoying life while I'm left behind, she thought. Iman wiped away the tears she had tried to suppress, sighing, and Uncle asks me, "What if Rami returns? God, if this is your way of punishing me for my actions, then I accept it if it means you'll forgive me." I was so happy just holding his hand, so elated by his insistence on spending time with me. I felt like those moments were my right, as though Rami was my fate, my share of happiness. I believed he'd always be there, that he'd never abandon me. But if he comes back, I swear to be the woman God wants me to be, someone who respects the boundaries he has set. Rising from the bench, Iman felt renewed strength and resolve, as if she had left behind a weaker, tearful version of herself. She ventured to the fabric dealers, inspecting new materials, then to the shops selling embellishments, noting the latest items available. Finally, she returned to the tailor shop with a sense of purpose, calling a meeting with the workers in Ibtisam. "Starting today, we'll embark on a new plan for our production," she announced. "We'll create complete bedding sets for brides, including a decorated bed cover, matching pillowcases, and a fitted sheet. Additionally, we'll sew a bag for the Quran, as brides often take it with them into their new home. We'll also make matching curtains, so brides won't have to worry about coordinating their linens. Everything will be ready and beautifully matched." Turning to Ibtisam, she added, "As for finances, I'll write down the fabrics and materials we need for the first 100 sets. You can decide if we should increase or decrease the quantity based on our budget." Iman began leaving her home each day to oversee the project's progress. Business soon picked up, and neighboring shops even started placing orders for the custom sets. The shop became so busy that Iman began considering an expansion. Ibtisam, however, remarked, "That's something I can't do alone. But Mr. Rami mentioned he might come to Jerusalem next month, so we can discuss it with him then." Iman smiled to herself, feeling nothing at the mention of his return. No stir of emotion, no longing through her work. Iman met various shop owners and learned about their stories. Many of them inquired about Hassan, recounting similar stories of imprisonment and recounting how different lawyers and advocates handled their cases. For the first time, Iman felt she had family and friends around her. Everyone within the walls of the old city seemed to live like one big family, despite their differences, while those outside the walls felt like a distant but inseparable part of them. Aunt watched Iman as she dressed in wide-legged trousers that had become fashionable, tying her long hair up in a ponytail as she left for work. She saw in Iman the fulfillment of the dream she and Iman's grandmother had held, that one day, a young woman from their lineage would stand strong and manage their affairs capably. One morning, as Iman was about to enter the shop, she noticed a familiar face standing near the door, staring at her. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Rami with his same warm gaze and bright smile. She greeted him with a smile, shook his hand and said, "You arrived early. What brings you here?" "I couldn't wait. I wanted to see what you've accomplished here." Iman suppressed her emotions, turning away from him, scolding herself for even smiling at him. Rami spoke up. "I knew you were talented. I always expected more from you. You're one of a kind." Iman remained silent, with an ironic voice in her mind saying, "Yes, I'm the woman." Rami had returned with no plan to rekindle their old relationship, yet being near Iman stirred a different side of him, as if he were still that young man, willing to run away with her to the world they once dreamed of. Without planning it, Rami became a regular presence at the shop, asking about different tasks and adjustments. Iman helped him, giving ideas and suggestions on various aspects of the shop's operations. One day, Rami said, "I spoke with Shadia. Do you know what we talked about?" "No. It was about you. She told me you visited the shop, that you called me your close friend. I knew then that you still hold respect and kindness for me." Iman was shocked that Shadia shared their trivial conversations with him. She replied, "Did she tell you about the nasty comments I overheard? From her? Don't mind her. She's just a simple girl. Don't take her comments seriously." Iman thought to herself, he hasn't changed at all. He doesn't even ask what I heard and makes excuses for everyone else. Rami continued asking about aunt, uncle and Afaf. He hinted that he'd like to visit them, but each night Iman would come home, thinking over his words, replaying them in her mind, just as she used to. When Rami visited Iman's house, Aunt received him graciously, acting as if nothing had happened. Rami, responding to Uncle's question about marriage, said, "I haven't married yet." "Then who's this German woman?" "She's just my fiancée. I thought if I gave myself a chance to get to know her, I might love her." "But we heard you went to Germany with her." "Yes, I met her family there. That's all." Uncle glanced at Iman with a disapproving look, as if to ensure she heard the absurdity of Rami's casual mention of his fiancée. But he was stunned to see her pleased with what she heard. When Rami left, Uncle took Iman's arm and pulled her aside in the courtyard, saying, "What's going on with you? Are you still pining for him?" Iman shook off his hand and replied, "No, why would you say that? He doesn't respect his fiancée. That's his choice. But you seemed happy about it." "Don't worry, Uncle. Don't you see? I'm still Hassan's wife." Uncle fell silent, as though suddenly reminded of something he shouldn't have forgotten. He lowered his head and said, "I'm sorry, my dear, but I just feel he'll sway your emotions again." Uncle left her to ponder his words as he went upstairs to rest, while Iman headed to her room, lost in thought, clinging only to Rami's words and glances. The next day, Iman arrived at the tailor shop to find Rami standing at the entrance, talking with two men. One of them was gesturing animatedly, saying, "Do you see the irony? One of my former students is now my colleague, and he makes more money than I do. He doesn't even bother calling me professor." "But he's your peer now," Rami replied. "Still, he should respect me. It makes me resent the hard-working students. Now I find myself liking the lazy ones." Rami laughed, watching the man leave. Turning to Iman, he introduced the remaining man. "This is Abu Salim. He's a master of the rababa and the ney." "Do you know what a ney is?" Rami asked Iman. "No," she admitted. "I'll show you. I'll take you to a friend's wedding, and Abu Salim will be performing with Dabka, Dalauna, and Majana until morning. Isn't that right, Abu Salim? Indeed, God willing. Tell me in your own words, Rami prompted Abu Salim, laughing. What did you think of the professor's complaint? Abu Salim chuckled, reciting a rhyming response like a folk tune. I saw the teacher on the steps of knowledge, we climb while he strains his strength, grudgingly watching those he once taught surpass him. Rami laughed heartily at this, affirming Abu Salim's invitation to the wedding, and then he and Iman walked into the shop together. What did you think of Abu Salim? Rami asked. He seems amusing, Iman replied, laughing. Delighted by her response, he looked her in the eyes and said, You'll attend the wedding, won't you? Caught off guard, Iman could only manage a hesitant, Yes. Good. I'll pick you up tomorrow around 5 since the celebration will go late. I'll have you back by 10. Let your family know. Iman left the shop, feeling both excited and uncertain about how to explain her plans. When the day finally came, she tried to delay going to the shop, feeling unsure of her decision to attend the event. Eventually, she dressed in a beautiful dark blue dress with a white collar and cuffs, cinched at the waist with a slim white belt that accented her figure. Afaf, observing her from behind, offered to help fix her hair, but the length was proving challenging. She asked, Tell me where you're going, and I'll help with your hair. Iman hesitated, her words caught on her lips, and Afaf continued, So you're meeting Rami somewhere? Seems like old times are back again. No, not like that. It's a friend's wedding, and I want to attend. Well then let's go to our neighbor Imhani. She's great at styling hair. Brides even hire her to come to their houses on their wedding day. Following Afaf's suggestion, Iman went with her to Imhani's. Along the way, they passed men heading toward Al-Aqsa, and one of them remarked, Isn't it time for women to cover their heads? Iman felt a pang of guilt at his words, and for a moment, she wanted to turn back and stay home. But Afaf nudged her to keep moving, asking, What's wrong? I want to ask you something. Aren't there shops that sell headscarves and prayer garments? Why don't women wear them more often? I don't think those are commonly available in the markets, but we're almost at our neighbors. After an hour, Iman left Imhani's house with her hair freshly styled, trimmed to just below her shoulders with a gentle wave. She felt a bit uneasy about the change, but she returned home, looked in the mirror, and pinned part of her hair back in a loose braid, leaving the rest to fall over her back. When Rami picked her up, Iman climbed into the car beside him, looking at her reflection and recalling Uncle Abu Walid's question, What if Rami shows up? She glanced at herself, realizing that her uncle's instincts had been correct. She had fallen back into her old ways with Rami without a second thought. Rami drove along Jerusalem's winding streets, heading toward Ramallah. Iman, curious, asked, Where is this wedding? In Albayr, near Ramallah. So, you have friends in Ramallah? Yes, a friend from London is marrying a cousin from Albayr. Traditionally, the groom's celebration is held the night before the wedding, and that's what we're attending. A groom's celebration? Isn't that just for men? No, it's a mixed event, and women join in the dabka with the men. They're all family. So we're going to Ramallah? After a moment's silence, Iman asked, Do you know about the Great Battle of Ramallah? Never heard of it. What's that? It's a battle that shook the earth under the feet of the British who came from London to occupy our land. Yes, I know them. What happened? Palestinian fighters turned the ground beneath them into erupting volcanoes. When was this? In 1938, when freedom fighters liberated Ramallah from the British and expelled them under the leadership of their commander Naubani. I think his name was Omar Naubani. And what happened after that? Ramallah was free for 48 hours. During that time, the British prepared with weapons, airplanes, cannons, and thousands of soldiers, while thousands of Palestinian fighters gathered to defend the city. Of course, the British won in the end. Yes, but the fighters managed to shoot down a plane and killed about 100 British soldiers. And how many Palestinian martyrs fell in that battle? 25. So what? Nothing changed in reality. Might still makes right. Yes, but I believe that justice is the true power, and it will prevail in the end. After all this time, yes, these struggles come in cycles, but in the end, victory belongs to the just cause. I hope you're right. I know I am. As Rami's car approached the groom's house in Albayr, they saw that the family had set up chairs along the street and closed it off, stringing colorful lights overhead. Rami got out of the car, and one of the young men helping to arrange the seating called out, "Rami is here!" A group of young men came running to greet him, each one eager to shake his hand, while Aman watched, impressed by Rami's popularity and the warm camaraderie he shared with everyone. The young man approached them, gesturing toward Aman and asked, "Is this the one?" "Yes." Laughing, the young man extended his hand to Aman, welcoming her before seating her. Turning to Rami, he said, "But you need to help the groom pick out his clothes. He isn't ready yet." The groom's mother, upon seeing Rami, let out a series of joyful ululations, offering him blessings and hoping he would soon find his own bride. She warmly invited Aman inside to meet her daughters and other female relatives. Inside, Aman's eyes were drawn to the beautiful traditional dresses, with vibrant embroidered patterns and rich fabrics, some adorned with golden threads and bright colors. The women wore scarves that matched their dresses, falling gracefully over their backs like a bride's veil. Guests continued to arrive, and the young men and women formed groups to perform traditional dances. Soon, Abu Salim arrived with his ney, sparking excitement among the crowd. He immediately began playing, singing traditional verses. "We've stopped singing of the girls, now we sing of the revolution and guns. Give us all you've got, O world, we are all sacrifice for Palestine." Rami leaned close to Aman and whispered, "Did you see the ney?" "Yes." "Good then. Are you having fun?" "Yes." Before he could ask her anything more, Rami's friends pulled him into the dabka, and shortly after, a group of girls grabbed Aman's hands, urging her to join. She protested, saying she didn't know the steps, but the girls insisted, laughing. "Just look at the others, they don't know the moves either and they're still dancing." Rami and his friends circled closer as they danced, and he took her hand, encouraging her to join in. Aman smiled and tried to keep up, laughing off her missteps. Sweet tea and treats were passed around, but no one seemed to tire of the dancing and festivities until Aman finally realized it was after 10 and asked someone to tell Rami that she was ready to leave. As they drove back, Rami's friends waved, wishing them well. The groom even ran after the car, begging them to come to the wedding itself. After they had left the celebrations behind, Iman broke the silence with a question that had been bothering her. "Why did your friend say, 'Is this the one?' when we arrived?" "Oh, I told him my business partner would be joining me." Iman grew quiet, her mind turning over the implications of that response. "Did his question bother you?" Rami asked, sensing her discomfort. "No. Well, they're simple people. Don't think too much about it. They live outside the city's complexities, without the psychological barriers you're used to." Iman fell silent and started blaming herself once more. Then Abu Salim's song echoed in her mind, when he said in his mayaleh, "The town's young women are like blossoms, and the young men like bees. Their minds are lost, and their bodies grow thin, and in their presence, we are bound and cannot be free."